Welcome back to another episode of Get Weird with me, your host, Brittany Barbieri, the podcast where history, legends, lore, cryptids, and the unexplained all collide while I break them down from a professional opinion, from a what the heck opinion, and we just frankly get weird. And today we're traveling into one of the most legendary places in Britain, Glastonbury Abbey, which, if I mispronounce it, I want to apologize ahead of time. I am doing my best. It's not just beautiful because it's breathtaking. Okay. That place is extremely stunning and I was just there. And it's not, it's, okay, let me just get into it. It's because it's one of England's most important medieval ruins. There's so much history to it. And it's not the type of importance that you might think. It lays into question something very, very compelling. And that would be, according to the medieval monks there, King Arthur and Queen Guinevere were buried there, allegedly. So here's the question. Did I actually stand over the grave of Britain's greatest legendary king, or one of history's greatest medieval hoaxes? So after walking through these ruins myself, I have to admit to you, I left with far more questions than answers, and maybe a little more sympathy for why the mystery refuses to die. So, as I like to say, let's get weird. So I finally made it to Glastonbury Abbey, and during my trip there through England, it was really remarkable. I got to see a lot of incredible places, but this place had an atmosphere that it's honestly difficult to explain or put into words. It's peaceful. It felt very sacred. The towering ruins almost felt like they were frozen in time. You were just surrounded by these ancient trees and green lawns that seemed almost untouched by modern life in an essence. And standing there, it's impossible not to imagine monks walking through the grounds nearly 1,000 years ago. You can close your eyes and just picture it. And the architecture alone really helped bring that picture to life in my head. And once you arrive at a particular location like this, it's a simple marker, an empty space. But this is traditionally identified as the burial site of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere. And there's no elaborate tomb, no royal sarcophagus, nothing, just a simple place and story. And when I stood there, I couldn't help but think, if Arthur was buried here, where are the remains? And of course, that question alone did what it does best to me. It sends me down a rabbit hole of questions and completely changed how I viewed this mystery altogether. So before we get into the archaeology of this, let's talk about Arthur himself, because here's the truth. We don't actually know if King Arthur ever really existed. Arthur doesn't appear in reliable contemporary records from the 5th to the 6th century. Instead, the earliest references describe him more as a great military leader than a king. So over the centuries, his story grew, and then suddenly Arthur had Camelot, right? The Knights of the Round Table, the wizard Merlin, a sword of Excalibur, and the Holy Grail, and Lancelot, and Guinevere. Oh my gosh. So we have all these pieces, right, that we start to form together. So most of what we think of King Arthur today comes from writers centuries after the time he supposedly lived. And that doesn't necessarily make the legend false, especially for someone like me. I still love to hold on to the belief. So history often begins with a real person whose story becomes a little bit larger than life over time as people continue to talk about this person. So we've seen that happen across cultures, especially throughout history. So could Arthur have been based on a real war leader? Quite possibly. Can we prove it? Up to today? No, not yet. We can't. So now we're at Glastonbury, right? The Glastonbury Abbey. It's 1191. The monks of Glastonbury Abbey announce an incredible discovery here. While digging between two ancient stone markers, they claim they uncovered a massive oak coffin buried deep underground, and inside were two skeletons, one male and one female, along with a lead cross bearing an inscription identifying the remains as Arthur and Guinevere. So the discovery spread like a wildfire, as it should. Pilgrims flooded the abbeys, donations poured in. Arthur had finally been found, or so everyone believed. And here's where things get really interesting for me, especially. Just a few years earlier, the Abbey had suffered a devastating fire. It desperately needed money to rebuild. And finding Britain's most famous king was extremely convenient, is how it looked at the time, which I understand. But again, it wasn't like it happened overnight or they fabricated this in a week. Again, it was many years later. So many historians believe that the discovery may have been staged to attract pilgrims and financial support. The question is, was it a fraud? Was it wishful thinking? Or had they genuinely discovered something truly extraordinary? And at this point in time, one never knows. And it's left up to either the believer or the person who just doesn't want to believe. And this is the part that really changed my perspective. In the 1500s, King Henry VIII dissolved England's monasteries. And churches and abbeys were stripped of their wealth, gold, silver, jewels, religious artifacts, anything valuable was taken, and buildings were dismantled. Many were abandoned, but what about human remains? See, well, this is where things become very murky. When an institution is being dismantled, and its valuables are being removed, skeletons don't exactly take the top priority list, if you're following what I'm saying. Now, if they had a bunch of jewelry on or gold and things like that, boom, those are taken, right? It's entirely possible that graves were disturbed, obviously, bones displaced, remains scattered across wherever. Documentation has been lost forever. And standing at Arthur's alleged grave, I realized something. Even if Arthur had been buried there, there's a very real possibility that those remains simply didn't survive through history. It just wouldn't. Not because of some grand conspiracy and not because someone hid them, but because history can be incredibly messy. Empires fall, wars happen, religious reforms reshape entire nations, and sometimes things disappear simply because no one thought that they were worth preserving. And that is what really hit me just sitting there. That realization reminded me of something we deal with constantly in cryptozoology, archaeology, and even within science. People often expect evidence to survive forever, but that's rarely how reality works in these areas of field work. And evidence is fragile. Fossils do erode. I know that's crazy, but they do. Artifacts decay. Records burn. We've had that throughout history. My God, hundreds of years of fires destroying important records that we needed. Bones do disappear. Science alone isn't about filling gaps with certainty. It's about forming the best explanation using the evidence available while acknowledging what we don't know. When evidence is missing, people naturally want to fill those gaps, understandably so, but sometimes with legends or with assumptions and sometimes with new theories. Arthur's grave is almost a perfect example of this, an empty space surrounded by centuries of stories, some historical, some mythological, some impossible to verify, and honestly, that's what makes it so fascinating, especially for somebody like me, to be quite honest. So, did I visit the grave of King Arthur? Oh gosh, I hope so. I like to think that I did. I mean, I'm a believer. Maybe, maybe not. Did Arthur exist? Possibly. Do we have enough evidence to prove it? Not today. And that's okay. We don't have to have the evidence today. It's not like we have to set out today to prove once and for all this theory exists. But what if I found at Glastonbury Abbey, wasn't necessarily proof. It was just a perspective, right? History isn't always preserved the way we'd like it to be preserved. There's gaps, there's holes, there's things we have to do. We have to take care of things. And sometimes the evidence just survives and sometimes it doesn't. And that is all part of this field. That's all part of the work. That's all part of the process. And sometimes all we're left with is a story. waiting for the next generation to investigate. So personally, walking those grounds gave me a new appreciation for how easily pieces of our past can vanish and how quickly myths can step in to fill the silence. Whether Arthur was a real king, a legendary warrior, or a blend of several historical figures, one thing is undeniable. More than 1,500 years later, we're still talking about this guy. We're still talking about King Arthur and Guinevere and his story and the Knights of the Round Table, right? And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. That's the greatest part of it. And for me, that magic, that love and that passion and that whimsical, magical feeling of endearment and wonderment really took over me walking the grounds of that abbey. And, even going down by one of their little ponds there and seeing the fish and the ducks and sitting underneath the old, I like to say old grandmother willow, the willow oak there, the willow tree. It was very awe-inspiring, and it was easy to see how something could project into this legendary site, this legendary abbey with this legendary story. But I am a believer, and I will always sit on the side of believing. And for me, I felt that this not only helped me look at this with a different perspective and coming away with so much, but it also almost reignited that passion and love for the King Arthur story that I grew up with my mom and telling me all about King Arthur and Camelot. And, over the years, I've always had my ears on the ready for any news I hear about Camelot or King Arthur. And to be able to be standing there, I feel it almost ignited that excitement of discovery for him again, And of course, they talked about, and I want to add this in very quickly at the end here, that his grave, when it was redone, and they brought him and Guinevere to the high altar at the front of the abbey, it was made out of this beautiful black marble that was almost rare. And so during the Dissolution, when you see basically a tomb like that, that's a lot of money. So you're going to dismantle, break that down, take those pieces and sell them, and you're going to get a lot of money for them. And you don't really care so much about the bodies inside. Who cares if it was, the people hired to just rip and pull these things apart didn't care about the people inside and who they were. So, I just sat there and I went, what if this was King Arthur and Guinevere, and their remains and their story were just tossed to the wind because we cared more about the value of the abbey and getting money out of it when we were dissolving them than to preserve the history of the people and the stories and the people that were at the abbey and so forth. And, it was a beautiful yet sad perspective for me. And I still am thinking about it today. And I want to leave this with my listeners, go ahead and research the story, look it up, read into it. I had a very deep conversation with my husband about it. He's very analytical, and I come from a more creative and deep belief system of wanting to say what if all the time, right? And so it was a really good conversation to have. And he's like, yeah, but you don't find it odd that, all of a sudden they find this legendary body and they needed money? And I said, well, yeah, I do see how that could be odd. However, it didn't happen overnight. It's not like they took, a week to plan this out to say, oh, we're going to pretend that we found these bodies and blah, 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 and etch into this, basic monumental moment for our legacy here and create this story that's so heavily fabricated. Is it possible? Of course. Everything's always possible. But the fact that it happened a few years later, maybe, just maybe their prayers were answered. Who friggin' knows? We don't know because we don't have enough documentation to fill those holes. And as we are as people, we want to fill those gaps. And we also want to, I hate to say, but at times there's a lot of just non-believers out there of anything fun, and they just want to dismantle and take things apart. And I can't say with conclusion that Guinevere and King Arthur are not real. We don't have enough evidence to say yes or no. At this moment in time, today, we just don't have that answer. And at the end of the day, for me, That's okay. That's enough. We don't always have to have the answer. We still have people looking for Sasquatch, and we don't have enough definitive answer that it's real or not real, but we have some things to kind of go on, just like we have some things to kind of go on with King Arthur. So with that being said, I will always stay on the side of believing, as you all know. That's why this is Get Weird. But I myself will continue to go down this rabbit hole, and I expect you guys to do the same. If you enjoyed listening to this episode today, as you know, please subscribe. Come over to my Instagram, hit follow. I like to make a couple of random videos and things that we'll be posting there on Fridays that lead up for the release of the podcasts on every Friday. You can also follow me on my personal Instagram account, which is my professional page, which is Brittany_Barbieri_, or you can come over and see my wild wacky page of the paranormal mama of me just being me. It's also in the bio on my Brittany Barbieri page on Instagram. But come on over, hang out, continue to listen, subscribe to this channel so that when new episodes drop, which happens every Friday, and if I take a break, you will see that break list on my Instagram account. So you'll know when I won't be having an episode airing and when I will be having an episode airing. But now that I am back, we should be getting full swing into things. Kids will be going back to school here in a few weeks. So my schedule will be a little more flexible, and I'll be having a little bit more adventure and fun of diving back into my notes and my personal field work to sit here and discuss it with you. But this is very fresh to me because I was just in Scotland and England for 2 weeks, and I have a lot to share with you and a lot of information I even learned about Loch Ness and other incredible historical legendary locations from England to Scotland that I will not say that I know the history of, but that I talked to the individuals that live there and are working there and shared a lot of that incredible history with me from the people that are living it every single day, and it is part of their culture. And I love sharing that. I love sharing people's cultures and their histories and mysteries right here on Get Weird, because that's what it's all about. The world is strange. So, like I always love to say, until next time, stay weird, everyone.